Hi there, guys. Welcome to Craft Blends Book Reviews, episode 15. I'm your co host turned host today, Daniel, and I'm joined by my lovely.
Heather, yay!
Yay. So, we decided to do things a little bit different this time around because we're doing a classic. We're doing Giovanni's Room from James Baldwin. So we don't know if this is moving forward. It's a new idea. We just want to bring it up in this episode that we talk about the author a bit prior to our ratings and questions and discussions. So, no further ado, a little bit about James Arthur Baldwin. He was born on August 2nd in 1924 in Harlem, New York. He was the son of a preacher's man. And shortly after graduating, his preacher father passed away. Um, and, he had to juggle a lot of different jobs, but he never let go of writing itself. So later on, he moved to Paris in 1948 to concentrate on his writing. His first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, was written and published in 1953. He lived in Paris for about 8 years, coming back to the States at the height of the civil rights movement, where a lot of his friends and colleagues, were dying. And, the famous three that were assassinated: Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. His life and his work, of course, blends together, bleeding with topics such as race, identity, sexuality, class, and religion. He went to write 50 plus novels, plays, essays, poems. He even debated people in different countries. He passed away on December 1st, 1987, from stomach cancer in France. So, yep. And, today we're reading the queer classic, well, reviewing the queer classic Giovanni's Room, which is his second novel. And yes, so a lot of James Baldwin work, it's semi autobiographical. He still keeps it in the fiction sense, but he injects like life stories, just changes names, changes stuff around. So both James Baldwin and Giovanni's Room protagonist David, they escaped an upbringing and moved to Paris to find themselves. And David meets the enigmatic Giovanni, and they start an affair in Paris while his wife Hella is in
Girlfriend.
Spain. Say it again.
Girlfriend, Helen. She wasn't his wife
Girlfriend,
yet.
right? Not yet. He had proposed to her prior, and then she had to go figure herself. Thank you for catching me there. And so James always spoke about his queerness at a time where it was, criminalized, and he didn't really speak too much on his private life, but it was said that he fell in love with a Swiss man named Lucien, and Lucien later married, and but he still kept James as the godfather. So there's parallels there with Giovanni's Room. So you have a little bit of context, a little history, quickness on James Baldwin. And yep. So first questions first, like we always do at the start of the episode, is we give like a quick little review, like one sentence, and our overall rating to start it off. So I'll go with you first, Heather.
Yeah, so I ended up giving it a 4. I remember telling you at the beginning when we first writing it that his writing is very easy to hold on to. It moves quickly and not too quickly that you can't keep up with it, but definitely quick enough that you are fully like engrossed in the story. And definitely a 4, I think, hits it for me. I would even go so far as to give it a 5, maybe a 4.5, but definitely up there in books that are really good.
Yeah. Me, I'm a little bit lower. I'm still at 4, but I'm now doing decimals and stuff like that. So it's technically like a 3.75. It's because I have to preface it with I'm in my queer joy era. So like if it's really sad and it's really depressing and all of that, I tend to like lose like I'm like, damn it.
Yeah.
But I do understand its value as being the first one of its time. So I have to give that to its context. So, uh piggyback off you, his writing, of course, that's why it's high and it's never going to be a two or one ever. But his writing is, you teleport, and I love his dialogue and the way characters talk to each other and their truths. Also, the inner thoughts of like maybe unlikable characters as well. And then I also have to preface this as well. I made it a James Baldwin month, which I think was a mistake. But I'll diverge more into that later. I read his first novel, Go Tell It to the Mountain. I read Giovanni's Room, and I read If Beale Street Could Talk. So I had like a deep dive into James Baldwin. So my favorite of the three is If Beale Street Could Talk, but we're not, that I'll say a little bit later when we go into that discussion. Because that will lead into question number two. So first I'll go to you. Um, which we kind of addressed already, the question like what did you think of Baldwin's writing. So I'll just jump in and just say, repeat that it's teleportive. I love the language, like the dialogue, just the characters and everything. So talking about characters and talking about our protagonist, how did you feel about David?
Um, Putting myself into the head of the main character, I understood David immensely, much more than I even thought I would. I think that that's a testament to Baldwin's writing, is that you're fully integrated in his head. You can understand what he's feeling and why he's feeling it. And you can almost relate that to yourself. Even though obviously I'm not a queer man, I still understood a lot of what he went through and I understood why he thought the things that he did. However, it was hard to like him, especially towards the end, because he was just so um not true to himself in a way that I couldn't understand. More so because I I grew up also in a religious household, but I was a bit rebellious. And obviously I can be
Me
because
too.
I also grew up in a different era. So obviously I could be rebellious in a way. But even from a young age, I rebelled. So for me, it was like it was never too far off for me to hold to my truth in my religious household. Like I would have arguments with my mother and my father about what I believed. So like I couldn't understand that aspect of him, which is that he couldn't be true to himself, I guess. But definitely made sense why he was the way that he was, and really like lets you in on the mindset of the time and what he might have been experiencing and even what other characters are experiencing the same thing. So yeah, he was a nice character, understandable. He was complex, which is great. He just like he ran the spectrum of all of the emotions that a person could feel, and I think that definitely makes him an interesting character, to say the least.
Yeah, I could sympathize and I could relate. It's weird to like, put myself really back on those times. All I could speak is from my experience. And being a queer gay person, identifying as gay and non-binary, um, I was rebellious too in a, religious household. Now, granted, my mom wasn't, well, they weren't church leaders. We were just, nonchalantly go to church on Sundays and stuff like that. So it wasn't as predominant. And then also we grew up kind of in our teenage years, beginning to go into technology. So we started to, find queer books, find other queer people. So, trying to teleport myself back to that. He did escape, the States, and he did go to Paris, which he felt like he was able to maybe live more vicariously. So it's like there's a disconnect to like why he didn't just go for Giovanni, but that we could discuss a little bit later. So it's just also like, once again, I'm in my queer joy era. So I want characters to fight because we know a bunch of motherfucking queer characters fought in those times. And then the funny thing is that James Baldwin himself was queer. So, and then I'm teleporting myself back to like creative writing and stuff like that. Like I remember you used to read my short stories and everything. I would always do a woman or a female character. I was too scared to do like a gay character. So, like, for him to at least do that, he was in itself rebelling. So, like, we had to give it context. And if it's not for those books and it's not for those people living freely, I wouldn't years later have that with it. So,
Right.
yeah, so that goes into like art. Go ahead.
No, no, finish. Go ahead. What were you gonna?
No, I was just going to lead into the next question,
Oh,
which is
okay.
our thoughts
But
on the
before you do that, I was
setting.
gonna say,
This,
speaking to what you were just talking about, I found it interesting actually that he wrote about a white man moving to Paris. It's interesting to me because of
yes,
the parallel of him being a Black American and then writing essentially a story similar to his life, but in the perspective of a white man who isn't open with himself. I thought that was a really interesting choice, and I have to wonder why he decided to go in that direction. I even tried to research
yeah,
it. I couldn't really find like a real response. I did end up learning that his publisher at the time, he had said that he thought that it would alienate Black Americans if he wrote
Black
it
Americans,
from a
correct.
white perspective. But I have to wonder, like, I don't even have to wonder, I guess, because when you look into Baldwin's life, a lot of the time what he did essentially in his what would you say in this in his interviews and in his debates, what he always tried to do, and this is something that is really evident, is he always tried to kind of like make it so that even white Americans could understand what they were going through, what Black Americans were going through, what also of different, sexual orientations were going through. He seemed to want to be able to have everybody relate to each other. And I think that speaks to maybe why he did it this way. Because there I remember watching a little documentary where they were discussing how he was labeled the ambassador of like Black Americans or something like that. And he personally didn't like that, but I could see why, because he tried to relate everybody to understand, right? So I think in a way, like, if you think about his personality, what he tried to do in terms of getting everybody to acknowledge, experiences, is this was his way of doing that, of putting in his perspective, I guess, but in the vantage point of a white American. I just found that very
Yeah,
interesting. It was such a
yeah,
weird,
I found that so relatable
yeah,
because I was like, I was doing that in my own writing. I was
yeah.
scared
No,
to
me
write as a
too.
queer
Remember,
person.
remember I told you when I was growing up, I love writing and I always like to write, but I used to write from the male perspective. I wrote boy stories. It wasn't until I grew up that I started writing from a female perspective and I realized what I really wanted to do was write from a female perspective. But when I first started writing, it was always boys were the center of my stories. And yeah, it's interesting, I guess, that we do that as writers, but I think that is also talks about how we explore like
Exactly.
individuality,
And
right?
then with me adding maybe side characters that are queer, he does the same thing with, at least with Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's supposed to be the 14-year-old is supposed to be like him. And there's a lot of queerness written even in the first book. Like, I'm like, wow, Giovanni's Room is the first one, and they debated that one. But with Go Tell It on the Mountain, I guess because it's more subtext, but it's still like they're legit on page. Like, it's not debatable because he sees the other church choir boy, and then he sees men, and he says, I get the same feeling that they get about girls. I get it. It's there too. And then in if Beale Street Could Talk, even if it's like a heterosexual couple, there is subtext of fawning, maybe being bisexual, and then also the sister of how you call it, could be a queer character, but it's side or it's not the main focus. So it's just surprising to me and relatable as well.
Right.
So I get you. It's the context matters. So like thoughts on setting and set pieces.
Um, what do you mean by set pieces? I'm not sure of that.
Set pieces, I meant more like locations. Maybe I could say that setting, which is Paris, and then the locations like Giovanni's room itself, the
Oh, okay.
dingy queer bar, you know,
Yeah,
like thoughts on that.
I found it interesting that we didn't. I don't know. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the story was just about Giovanni's room, so we are centered more in France. Um, I could have used a little bit more insight into David in his hometown. There was some, but I don't know. It was mainly focused on his dad and the aunt and that relationship that they had. It was a
Yeah,
little like not confusing, but it didn't. I don't know if it added anything for me. Like I remember towards the end, I didn't even barely remember that beginning. So I wasn't really
yeah,
sure towards the end what the beginning was about, other than to give us the context that David and his dad just aren't like close. Um,
yeah. But also that he has, feeling for boys instead of girls, like with the boy he came to know in
right.
his hometown.
It's just it's more so that like I don't know, I guess I could have used a little
Like a setup.
yeah, it was just
I
forgettable.
get you because then all of a sudden we're kicked into like
That's what I was saying.
Paris.
It's a bit of a
Yeah,
forgettable beginning, so it was kind of like I'm saying by the end I didn't even like I barely remembered what happened at the beginning. So I could have integrated myself a little bit more at the beginning. But then like I think the thing that I'm not sure of is why France, even in Baldwin's life, why France? I know that at one point in an interview he had done, he said that like there wasn't anything anywhere else anybody could do that I wasn't already experiencing in America. So I guess like in a way that it could have been anywhere really that he would have ended up and it would have been the same. And I just have to wonder why France and why France in particular is it was such a big deal to
I know. I
real
wish we
life
could have
and in the
known more
story.
insight. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I wonder how the like if students, because he did become a teacher like way later in his life for a university, and oh my god, but I was like legit like about to be born. So like, but that would have been awesome to like sit in a class. That would, yeah. But for me at least, just what I want to ask, at least the pivotal like set piece or whatever. Did you feel a connection to Giovanni's room itself?
To be honest, no. It's funny
Me
because
either.
the book was called Giovanni's Room, but I wasn't involved in Giovanni's Room. I wish that he could have used
Exactly.
more of that. I feel like, I mean, there was a connection to Giovanni, but his room wasn't like as important as I would have expected it to be given the title.
Yeah.
But yeah, there
And then I
definitely
do,
was a disconnect.
and yeah, and then like I was thinking maybe it's that he had to do Fade to Black a lot, with queer stuff. But the beginning, him as a kid and experimenting, that's already like breaking a ceiling or a barrier. So it's like, why in Giovanni's room? It's like, I went to Giovanni. It's assumed they made love, but there's like, you know,
Yeah.
there's no, yeah, but that'll go into a later question.
Mhm.
So, but for now, at least I'll piggyback off that. Like, my favorite set piece, my favorite location was the dingy bar. I
Yeah.
was like, yes, I could, I could imagine it. I could see like the low lighting. I could see the queens, and
Yeah.
like all of that.
Definitely when he meets Giovanni too, right? It's like just it's a very integral part of the story, and it really like you can picture what it might have looked like, what these characters might have felt going into these places, the other characters, how everybody kind of had like their own almost personality and backstory, even though they weren't big, right? Like they weren't big characters,
Correct.
they still had all of this personality and all this
It was
back.
brimming with life.
Yeah, and you can imagine them, and I think that even speaks to like Baldwin having seen these people and then just writing them down essentially. Like this is who they are, and then this is the
Yeah.
reality of what they
And
are.
they could see themselves in it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And talking about characters, um, who resonated with you most? Who did you like the
I mean,
most?
of course, I think you know my answer, but hella resonated, but especially, and I know you asked about this later, so I don't want to talk about it too much right now, but especially when she starts talking about the role of a woman. Oh my God, I had so many thoughts and opinions, but we'll keep that for that question later.
So hella for you.
Yeah,
My favorite character was Jock.
really, that's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Because they try to paint him as like a sleazeball or like, like not a sex worker, but like a pimp, but not really.
yeah.
It was just, and the pieces of advice he would give David, like I was like, in a modern context, like I transitioned into a modern, it would be that best friend who's like, bitch, you're gonna break his heart. You're gonna ruin it. You better make sure you love this boy. You better not fuck shit up. And
I
you're always
agree.
coming for me for money. Like it's like
I think
I
he
just
was like almost like a nicer version of Guillaume, right? Like the version of
mhm.
Guillaume that was just a little nicer, but they were kind of the same character. It's just Guillaume was a little more evil, and then Jock was a little more down to earth, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's still with context of the time, it still is paying for sex and all that stuff. But like, just transferring it to a modern context, I kept seeing him in a modern sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What he would look like now.
So exactly. So you know, I wanted to talk about mm, my favorite scene,
Okay.
which because that's our next question. And my favorite scene, which is probably gonna, well, I won't assume yours, but mine was when Giovanni lets David have it.
Yeah.
When he's like, you don't want to stink like me, and you don't want to like, you don't want to breathe in what love actually is. Even though you could read him as like a desperate character with his backstory, but that will be a later on question. But yeah, at least my favorite scene, I really loved when Giovanni lets David have it
Yeah.
in Giovanni's room.
That's funny. I was trying to find where it was in the book.
Take your time. But yeah,
'Cause I
it's
also I also like that scene myself. I really like that he was like even though yeah he did seem at least a little desperate, I guess you could say, but he also was very like I think the thing that is likable about him in that scene especially is very true to himself, you know? He's like this is just who I am and you're ashamed of that, you know? You're ashamed that you're just like me basically, right? And like I
yeah,
think that definitely is such a like it's such a sad moment because of his desperation, right, to be loved and to want to love someone and to have a glimpse of what that could look like for himself, you know. And then for David to be so almost blasé about the fact that he's literally ruined his life, you know? And then like
yeah,
it really he really does kind of explode and I think really puts out there what a person at that time would be feeling when someone they love kind of rejects them in that way, especially during a
exactly.
time when you're essentially rejected from the world.
And David is super duper guilty as well because he
Yeah,
led him on. He
yeah,
super led him on. So like it's completely amazing to now go to the next question because we're already there, which is like, did the desire or love ring true? So for me, I just, once again, since maybe he couldn't fully elaborate and we only get one protagonist, like to me, It's there, but I wanted more. I
Hmm.
wanted more because you do get hints of like David starts becoming domesticated, I guess, and like, cleaning Giovanni's room, being like the more submissive one of the
Right.
gender roles and, with the binary concept, you know. So, like, I'm thinking of it through Giovanni's perspective of like, wow, this guy really loves me. He's like cleaning the house, he's making food, he's always there for me. We make love every night. Like, you know, so like, and then all of a sudden, well, Hella, that was most of their fights. We get more fighting about Hella than we do of their actual, like, at first I loved it because they're meet cute at the bar. And then I loved their flirting in the taxi when they were moving to another bar. And then where he invites him to Giovanni, his room. I love that flirting, but then it does that weird thing of like fade to black, and then we just stay in David's repression. And that's where the book falters a bit. I just wish, even if the book had to be sad, even if the book, but go there with like, and he does, there's pieces of there, but he's just life. He has to go back into his robot denial of like, this is not how society works. I could be killed. Like, I can't. So it's understandable, but I wanted more.
Yeah.
So I felt like the love, at least for me, didn't ring absolutely true. Maybe the lust and the desire and what, I fell in love with the idea of it. Yes, but they only knew each other like one summer. It's like, girl, but that's different thing of opinions. People could fall in love quick.
Yeah, and I think definitely there's this how would you say, like, if this was written now, I think it could definitely be different in the sense of that there's definitely more of like
That's
really,
why I want a movie adaptation so
yeah, to
badly.
go far.
Because
Yeah.
all the other works, like, that's one thing I'm going to say really quick. The movie adaptations are so great of his books. So, like, there hasn't been any misses. So I'm hoping if we ever get Giovanni's Room, it would be amazing. Like, because they could change it and add more. Okay, so um now you, Heather, did the desire ring true or the love of David and Giovanni?
I think it did for me, for David for sure. I mean for Giovanni. I think for Giovanni, I think he did feel like an affection for him that you could understand, you could tell he cared about him. But yeah, I think that I have to agree with you that there could have been just more to that. I definitely feel like
I
that was funny.
sorry about that.
No, I definitely feel that like it could have been more emotion, I guess. But I don't know, I think at the same time, like, I don't know, I suppose I can kind of understand like what he was thinking when he wrote this. And like I can see why there had to be like, how would I put it? Like there had to be just a almost like a limitation to, how would I put this? Like, I don't know if this is true, this is just what I'm assuming, right? Of the time.
Yeah,
But I'm thinking there had to be a limitation on whether or not you could have a viable relationship between two men at the time. Does that make sense? Like maybe
yes,
it was almost in terms of like maybe what his publishers thought, maybe what even he like limited himself even as an open
yeah.
queer
Like one of
person.
his friends,
Yeah,
Marlon Brandon, the actor who later on we knew was queer and had to like super hide it.
exactly. Like there was almost like this weird, like, I guess it was almost like this background feeling of can two men have a viable relationship as a man and a woman does? I feel like that those were elements that were very integral to the story because of how Hella was introduced and what happened with her. But then also Giovanni also had a woman on the side that he loved, apparently in a village, right? So
Yeah,
like here we have your actual relationships, what happens between a man and a woman, right? Like actual gender norms, right? And then like almost a question, is it possible for two men to have this kind of relationship? What does it entail? What is that going to look like? And I think maybe there was, it could have been in that realm of like almost, you know, like you almost don't want to ask those questions, or maybe you're not sure of the answer to those questions. And as a writer, if you don't know the answer, then you don't really know how to put it down, right? So
exactly.
maybe it was almost like a question even to himself. Can two men have a viable relationship if there's no woman, right? And I think that's just a question that like maybe, especially coming from his upbringing, why he would maybe wonder about that. And maybe that's the disconnect we have with their love, is it doesn't feel real because there's almost like this wall of, can it even be love in the regular
Yeah,
sense, right?
exactly. And James Baldwin being in survivor mode.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah,
There's a
it
possibility, I don't really
makes
know, but
sense.
that's kind of how I read
Yeah,
it.
we don't know. We don't know. We're yeah. So talking about backstories, um, let's dive into it. So David, David's backstory at the beginning, and then Giovanni's backstory at the end. So I guess we'll go with David's backstory since it's quicker. Um, David's backstory is so true to like queer life. I could see that when you're like, the innocence of being a kid and, discovering identity and not really sex, but just like, because it's so innocent, just discovering that for the first time. So, like, you know, and not to reveal that I've had similar situations, but you could maybe interpret I've had similar situations. But yeah, like the backstory rug super true with me. Now with Giovanni, it was out of nowhere. I was like, damn, he had a wife and then a stillborn child. I was like, damn, that was like, whoa. And then I just like it just like completely took me off. And then I hated myself just a little bit because I'm like, is he just doing this for sympathy? Like, you know, because also it's a little bit of David, because David is disconnected in that scene. He's so disconnected and he's so nonchalant that it makes you like the reader like kind of turn into him a little bit because he's the main protagonist. So I was like, why am I not feeling bad? It's David. David's making me feel this way. Like, why? Like, am I, and he immigrated to another, you know, country and like just like I don't know. What do you think?
Um, yeah, I agree with you on David. I think his side of the story was definitely understandable. Like I understood where he was coming from fully. I think David was very fleshed out in that sense. Yeah, Giovanni did feel a little less fleshed out. That felt, I could see where that felt a little tacked on in a weird way. And
Yeah, because it's through dialogue, his backstory, not
exactly, yeah.
a flashback.
Right. And then so yeah, I can kind of see where what you're saying. I particularly didn't either. I didn't really feel one specific way or another because I already understood from David that Hella was the woman that made him normal, right? And so I guess for me, I understood in Giovanni's sense that was his normal, that was the woman that was going to give him the life that he coveted. And then I can almost kind of envision myself as Giovanni in that sense, where I have these feelings. I'm trying to make a life for myself, and then the child that is supposed to be mine dies, And I can kind of understand almost like, is this like my punishment for being the way that I am? Is it that I'm not being honest and that's why this is happening to me? And he goes forth and tries to like figure himself out, I guess.
Exactly.
I can imagine a
I
stillborn.
could see that.
Yeah,
I could
I can
see that.
imagine a stillborn having that kind of effect on a person. But yeah, I don't, but that's the thing, is that I'm putting that in there. It's not uh,
It's not there.
yeah.
It's not there.
So it's not
And then you
explained. Yeah.
and then you see that he's kind of a sex worker. It's
Yeah.
insinuated, and then he's been jumping from different guys, and then the guy at the bar, he doesn't want to go. He's like, regardless of how hungry I am, I'm never going to go to that bar owner of the dingy
Right,
bar,
right.
which he does end up going, and that whole thing. So it just made me seem like he was grasping, he
Yeah.
was desperate, but it's sad because we don't know his context. We don't know, like, we there's seeds of three-dimensional characters, but at the end of the day, we don't get Giovanni. We just get David.
Yeah. There was a scene that I was gonna read a passage that I really liked at the beginning with David. And it was
Go
so,
ahead.
I don't know, I really love this line. There were so many lines that I really liked and I highlighted some, but this one I liked,
Yeah.
and we had discussed it earlier with the boy that he falls in love with, right? Joey. And he says, for a while, he was my best friend. Later, the idea that such a person could have been my best friend was proof of some horrifying taint in me. I was like, damn, that hurts.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
It
like
does.
it's like it perpetuated this hatred within himself, right? Like of course I've attracted this person into my life because this is what I am. Like I'm just tainted it this way. This is what is following me throughout my life, right? And it's just like it's heavy throughout the whole thing. And then with Giovanni, right, with him wanting to be with this man, and the whole situation that happens with them, the feeling of being tainted and being different was really like, that line was just so good, and I think it really radiated
Yeah.
the entire book.
And a lot of queer people to this day still feel that way.
Exactly, yeah. And it just makes
Yeah.
me think of our tendencies also to find our people. We find people like us or who think like us, and we sometimes don't even realize it, right? The connection that we have. And it almost makes you wonder why it is that we're able to find each other, right? Like why we're able to find people who can understand us, who see the world that we
Yeah. If it's not natural.
exactly. Like
Exactly.
it's really it just opened the room for this conversation of like, yeah, I am able to find my people, especially when I give in to accepting that side of myself, right? Like once you can articulate and accept who you are, you almost find what you're looking for in that regard, right?
Exactly.
And like
Yeah.
even accidentally, in this case, you find someone who mirrors you because this is just who you are. And then but then to see that as a negative thing, as a tainted thing, was very sad. And just like I said, just very integral to the rest of the story. But yeah,
Exactly.
I think there was a more of a focus on them individually than it is about the romance, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfair to draw Giovanni as a villain because he's
Yeah.
not. And that's not our point we're getting across at all.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
not.
Yeah.
It's
Like
just,
Giovanni's story for me was it was sad for me.
it
Not in
was
like,
sad.
not super like into it, but understandable. And I can almost, like I said, I can almost see being in his head and going like, is this my punishment? Like losing my newborn and my life. And this is, I need to get away from this because this is not, I'm not being true to myself, I guess, right? Like I can almost see that, but definitely it doesn't, it's not there. And I think we could have had more reflection on that for sure.
Exactly. And then just so people could know going into James Baldwin, I think this would be the perfect time for me to like state this. If you're thinking of doing, even though this should be at the end because of recommendations and stuff, but James Baldwin gets sad in his other books as well. It's not just Giovanni's Room. That's why I said reading him for the whole month was a bad idea because I'm like half a mood reader. So it fucked me up nasty. Like I was texting Heather, I'm like, Mama, I can't do it, Mama. Mom, I'm sending her pictures of my tears. I'm like, Mama, make me stop.
Yeah, no,
I
I
was like,
I could understand that for sure. Yeah, I mean, even when I started to read Go Tell It on the Mountain, that was very heavy with the religious, like,
yes,
and like I
yeah.
remember like telling you that I was having flashbacks from my church days. It's that my mom is very religious, and we would go to church every Sunday, and she'd even sometimes drag us on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So like very religious. I had to go to Sunday school and everything. So I understood kind of like this displacement of like I don't understand. I want to understand and I'm trying, but really I don't. And then
And then finding, yeah.
eventually coming into your reality, like, yeah, this isn't for me, you know?
Yeah, and then we could relate with that with, finding solace in like, movies and books and just like life in
But
general. Because
yeah, but I could definitely see where it would be heavy, especially if, as a gay man, it would be very difficult to kind of put yourself, because nowadays, like, right, there's more openness, the ability, but there's still some of that, like,
yeah, like for example, to give a
back.
little
Yeah,
piece of me, like I would still be scared for PDA with a partner because
exactly.
I might still be a millennial and I might be like rebellious, but in the back of my mind, I have like the Hispanic stares of like, and then the danger of survival mode of like, even though I didn't when I was younger, I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna hold his hand, I'm gonna kiss him in public. But now as an adult, like when you go into survival mode and like it's just, so I could relate to that.
Yeah, and relating
So
to that would definitely cause these topics to be very heavy, I can imagine.
exactly. Now talking about relatability, how about your thoughts on the roles of women in this book, especially with Hella?
So I think we actually talked about this before, you and I, about hold on, about the fact that like I think you had said to me like how do you feel about kind of like sexism in the gay community, right? With the men in the gay community. And it's like on the one hand, I don't like it, obviously, because I believe that, I am a feminist and I believe that we're all equal. But on the other hand, I accept it, not maybe not accept it, I can understand it more from a gay perspective because it's kind of like you're essentially forced to have to want to be with someone you don't want to be, right? And I think that
Yeah.
would create animosity. It would create discontent, and you would view another person as just like if it's like an arranged marriage, right? Like you're forced to be with someone, you don't really know them that well, you don't really connect with them, and now you're fully integrated into their lives, but you're not enjoying that, right? So like I can
Yeah.
that's probably as close as I could explain it, right? So then you have to kind of like lie to yourself, lie to that person, lie to the world. And so I can understand this sort of like almost like a hatred you would develop, even if maybe you didn't want to, you would develop it a little bit. Not on top of that, but then on top of that, you have the reality that the world was very sexist at this time. And so for them, you keep hearing it, you keep hearing it. On top of that, you're being told that you have to love someone of the opposite sex, that you can't be with people that you want to be with. And so I can almost understand this weird, almost disrespect to women, and I just think
Yeah.
that it's not far off to assume that at the time, especially, these men would feel this way about women. It's hard, obviously, because I feel like you had said before, you feel like a gay person should understand a female viewpoint, but then I can almost see where you wouldn't, or even so, even though you do, maybe you
You
still
got blind spots.
upset about it, right? And
Yeah.
I think that the thing that I really enjoyed about Hella was this almost kind of like I would imagine that it was kind of like what other women, more progressive women, would have been feeling at the time, where in your heart of hearts that you shouldn't belong to anyone but yourself, right? But you're not
Exactly.
there yet. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it because like I put myself fully in someone in her shoes. This idea that make me a woman, right? Make me a woman by having your child, by belonging to you. But then knowing in her heart that that's not what she wants, but the world isn't like ready for that yet for her, right? Like, and not to say that it wasn't completely possible, but there was just this big stigma on women who were single, maybe, obviously women who were queer, and then, women who maybe wanted to travel the world, didn't want to have to settle down. Like, these women were viewed down upon. And she almost like, it broke my heart because I could see this like almost fight. I don't want to be this. I don't have a choice though. I don't have a choice. And like, if I can at least do this with someone I care about and someone who will give me like love and affection in a positive way, like I guess I'll just have to give my, like, I'm about to cry. Hold on. I have to give myself to you because you're all I have, because I don't know how to be myself in the world as it is, right? And I just like her experience and the way she talked and the way she talked about that traditional role that even she herself doesn't really want, but she kind of has to want because what else is there for her, right? Like it really like for me tugged at me and like my essence, my femininity, my being a feminist in general. Like it really just like pulled my heartstrings a lot.
Okay, so to jump off to another point, what did we think of other women's roles other than Hella in the book?
Right.
There's
So mhm.
there's the landlord lady, and then there's the one night hookup that David has.
Remind me of the landlord lady because I can't remember her right now.
She's the one that she has this whole speech about that, that you shouldn't be alone so long, that you should make like a decision. So we already talked about Hella.
Mhm.
So we're gonna bounce to the other women in the book, which is like the landlord lady and also, the one night stand that David has.
Right. Well, to be very honest, I think it just kind of speaks to, again, what we were talking about earlier, where even gay men can put a sort of stigma on women. And especially during the time that this happened, because there's this idea of, you know, women are always kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like, how would you say, like women are just kind of being, they tend to be always used, even in the scenario of gay men, and it's kind of hard as a woman to see that because obviously like it makes sense. It's a weird place to be, right? You're in two spots as a woman, for me especially. I can understand, right? Like I can understand a gay man trying to make it work with a female partner, trying to be normal as they want them to be, right? But then, you know, but then again being used in that sense, I'm pretty sure I watched recently someone talking about the Will and Grace, the show, right? You remember that show, and how Grace was in love with Will and stuff like that, and like he pretended to care about her in that way, before he realized he was gay. And in fact, the way that Will and Grace started was because the person who wrote the script and stuff like that actually had a similar experience where they dated someone, they didn't know they were gay, and then they come to find that they are. And it's hard because like you can understand where maybe someone just doesn't know that they're gay and they haven't kind of like reflected enough on it, so they think, oh, I like this person as a person, so I must want to date them, right? But then you had people in this scenario like David who were with women just because, even though they knew that that's not what they wanted, it's just what society wanted from them, right? So it always puts me in a weird place because it's like I can understand needing to do that, but then it's just this idea of how women are constantly used. I really like that James Baldwin at least brought to light that reality for women as well, on top of on top of the realities that gay men had to experience too. And it's something that I think I really appreciated, especially because I feel like he was able to discuss that in a really like subtle but very expansive way. So
Yeah.
sorry, I
And
was
still gave them and still gave them agency, I feel.
yeah,
At least with Hella. She's not one dimensional. She's not like, the stereotypical of other gay media, like the wife that finds out and she goes like crazy or nothing. Like
yeah, exactly. Hmm.
yeah, she's like, she's forgiving. But she does get angry. She's three-dimensional.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What about
Um,
you?
uh, for me, yeah, especially with Go Tell It on the Mountain and If Beale Street Could Talk, he does give female roles, you know, three-dimensional aspects, and he gives them agency, and at least to my point of view, and I could, relate to his writing of like, because gay men we love strong women, so he doesn't like necessarily write them weak
Right.
at all. Yeah. So, and they're not just, props, because even with like the one night stand, there's like a sadness to that scene and her saying like she'll light a candle up if he wants to like come again or whatever. And, yeah, and then you pretty much hit the nail on the head. And I don't want to like go on because you like summed it up like perfectly. So, like, I'll just add a +2. But yeah. But our next question would be our thoughts on the ending and how we resonated with it. So I guess I'll start with how I felt. Um, how you call it? I'm gonna mention this again, but my queer joy era. So I hate sad ass endings. I was surprised though that only one of them died instead of both of them. So yay, a +1 in that category. Uh I did like, it left me like a good few days like, damn, thinking of Giovanni and being like rotting in the jail cell and then being executed and how he was drawn as the villain. Oh, and it's just like, ugh. And then, David agonizing over it, and that's when him and Hella have that whole long conversation. And just like, I'm glad I'm glad for it. At the same time, it's so weird because the ending could have been like a little bit lackluster and could have gone to the route where David just like gives a sad smile, but he walks into his sunset with Hella, you know, like symbolized sunset. But
Right.
no, David gets the sad ending because I'm like, if fucking Giovanni gets the sad bad ending, motherfucker, David better get the sad ending too. I'm not gonna, because me, I have a thing with like, with the one person who tries to go into the heteronormative side and
Yeah.
then they get that
Justice.
arbitrary, yeah, exactly, they get that arbitrary happy ending. I'm like, no, girl, you're not leaving. I'm gonna be like that shadow hand who like grabs you back. Um, so it was just like sad that like David was agonizing and then just David walking the streets alone and he couldn't stop thinking about Giovanni. Now I wish I had more context with their relationship, and I wish their relationship, that's the only thing that falters in the whole entire book, that I feel like if he would have rewrote it now, or he would have given more love context to that relationship, because at the same time I just felt like, but it was the wrong time, wrong, era, like they couldn't. But overall the ending, I just felt like I felt satisfied and I didn't feel too devastated because I've already been charred my heart, like especially with films and stuff like that. Like I'm used to the sad gay ending, so I've been a little bit desensitized. Sometimes I'll send you a picture and I'll be like, "Mama, why?" Even in the happy era, even in the more recent books, I'm like, "No, sad endings. Give us happy endings for a little while." Uh, but I did feel like it balanced enough into where it wasn't as stereotypical as I thought it would be. I didn't think it was going to be like it's still devastating. Don't get me wrong, but at least they both kept a sad ending or whatever. And it's just the life of the times. They'll always have Giovanni's room.
Yeah, I can agree with that too. It definitely wasn't as heavy as other films and TV shows and books that we've read. It was on the tamer side for a sad ending for sure. And yeah, I think it was difficult for sure for Giovanni's situation was so sad. I think I really liked that even though we're not exactly for sure what happened with Giovanni, I do like that we get at least some kind of idea of what happened through David, where he's like, this is probably what happened. And it made me sad to think about like someone taking advantage of like someone in a rough place like that, and then, saying, yeah, I'm gonna help you. You just gotta you do me first, do for me first, and then I'll do for you. But then taking that back at the end, right? Like that was sad to think about with Guillaume and Giovanni. And like it was just this thing where it's like it's crushing to imagine a poor young man in that situation and having to deal with what he did and then to then suffer for it because he didn't want that life for himself, right? And he suffered for it because of that. And
Yeah,
the devastation of that, right? And then to have David just kind of like, oh, like he's he's kind of like agonizing over it, but at the same time, like what can he even do, right? Like, I mean, it's not like David killed him and Giovanni's taking the fall. Giovanni did it, right? But then like to agonize over knowing the place that the part that you played in that and having to sit with that for the rest of your life, right? And then on top of that, the shame and everything like that. And it just, yeah, definitely like it was very heartbreaking and very like, and for everybody, I don't think anybody had a happy ending in this one.
yeah,
Like Hella then has to now figure out what she's gonna do, right? Giovanni's in jail. David is like, lost in life and unsure of what's happening. The only one that's left is like Jacques, and he's just kind of like, he's got his money and he's got like his things, but like just the life that he then has to continue to live after that. It just, yeah, it was
yeah,
it was a sad ending. It really was difficult to take in, and but it's definitely earns its place in queer classics, right? Like your gay classics. It definitely earns
yeah,
its place. I think that, and in classics in general, I think that as classics go, this should be on the list, along with 1984, along with, all those other books. This also needs to be on the list and on the radar for people. And I love a book that is like this, where you take themes that are prevalent in straight society or in regular society, and then you add on top of that a face of reality of the how would you put it, the outcasts of said society, and you normalize their experiences. And it definitely is something that James Baldwin does, is like he takes the outcasts and he normalizes their experience. He makes it edible for people who are not living that experience to take in and understand, oh, this is what a normal person is. This is normal as well. This is normality. We all go through these same emotions. We all go through these same thought processes. We all deal with the same kind of life, right? And it really like allows us to see the perspective of our own lives but in the eyes of someone else. I think James Baldwin does a really good job with that. And yeah, definitely, but definitely heartbreaking ending. I think that all around it was very sad. And I really enjoyed the last line of the book, where he says, yeah, as I turn and begin walking toward the waiting people. The wind blows some of them back on me, right? So he's talking about the envelope that he had torn into pieces and threw into the wind, and it blew away, but it also came back onto him. And I think that was such a great line to end that book on, where your actions, you can try to do away with them as much as you want, but at the end they'll always be there. Your consequences will always
Sure.
come
Yeah.
back to you, and the reality will always come back to you. You can't just get rid of it. And
Yeah.
I think that that was such a very strong line to end the book on, and very just very eloquent to the times.
Yeah. Now, for me, it's weird because I could agree with all your points, but the thing is, and it's really, really, really hard to relay this point. I'm going to try my best. With queer content, when a lot of it is like sad and a lot of it is negative and devastating and stuff like that, it tends to fuck you up, your psyche, and
Mm-hmm.
it tends to like make you feel like, damn, this is what's waiting for me in this lifestyle. So like, of course it should be a queer classic, and we should have those. But like when we're put into like boxes, and then I can't speak for like the black experience or women's experience or anything, but like if you know black stories are only about like slavery and poverty, and then gay stories are only about how hard it is to be gay and get sad endings, they both die, and then women being like the props for men in all storylines, like those things, it's weird to recommend it because I don't like to. It depends on the person. It depends highly on the person. If you like things that are heart wrenching and that are stuff like that, then I would recommend it. But there are other books that I feel do the sadness of the gay storylines, but in a better way. But we don't know James Baldwin's limitations at the time. We don't know, so it's still an important work, and I don't want to knock it down at all. But I also want the queer joy of it all, because where are our stories of like, because there are queer people that survived those horrible times, that stayed living together for 50 years, that they said fuck it to the heteronormative normative lifestyle. I want those stories too. I want the survivors too. I want the survivors too, not just the victims, if that makes any sense. So like it's it does belong in the queer repertoire. It does. And especially how highly influenced it is in many other gay novels, because they mention it. They like, now I have context to it, because maybe me in 1954, being a young man getting the book in a brown paper bag, because I have a similar experience to that a bit, even if it is with Alex Sanchez's Rainbow Boys, that I had to like rent it in the library, but then I had to put it inside my Trapper Keeper because Rainbow, the title Rainbow Boys, like so I had to like be careful not to have anybody like see it, and I had to like read it at home,
Yeah,
so I could understand that, and I have to reread Rainbow Boys eventually because maybe it doesn't hold up anymore
yeah,
to me. But going from my childhood time, that book was like amazing. So that could have been the same representation, even if it was sad, or it was that first like, we exist, we're there, they can't ignore it.
yeah,
So I could see the value in that as well. But I'm also the type who's fighting. Those sad stories deserve to exist. I'm not saying they're not supposed to,
right,
but I also want the happiness, and then I also want the things that are not in queer context of just being queer, but just having somebody that's queer.
right.
Give us, the gay Indiana Jones. Give us the gay, you know, uh, like different archetypes of our stories and heroes,
Yeah,
just that they happen to be, which is happening now. It's happening
yeah,
now,
it's definitely
at
happening.
least in literature. Movies are still slightly behind, but because every Oscar bait is still in the drenched in sadness. But
Yeah,
But yeah, so that's at least my we kind of answered that question of the queer sensibilities
Yeah.
of the book and does it hold up and stuff like that. So we pretty much both sum it up from
Yeah.
opposite sides.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
the last
I guess the reason I would, the only thing I would argue in that sense is that I feel like James Baldwin, especially like, I think what he kind of did was just kind of like, I think he did essentially what you wanted him to do, but obviously it wasn't a happy ending. But he did kind of like write a story where he was um talking about gay complexity, as in these are the type of gay people that exist in the real world, and they are complex, they have interesting lives, they're people like everyone else, right? So I think
yeah,
that's why for me it like it didn't, I guess because like I've read a book by Albert Camus called The Stranger, which is almost similar just in the sense of like one of the characters kills someone else, but it's this look into the human psyche, right, into the mind of humans and why we do the things we do and what could possibly shift us and control us and direct us in our decisions, right? And I think that that's what he was doing in this book, but with gay people. And so that's why for me it hit differently. And maybe like I said, obviously I am not a gay man, so I'm not going to have the same
yeah,
experience of you reading it. But that's how I kind of viewed it, is he was kind of referencing gay complexity, gay men complexity. They have all
yeah,
these inner worlds happening, and it sort of normalizes it, like I said, for the greater audience, that these are real people with
yeah,
real emotions and complex lives. They just happen to like other men, right? And so like, but I can understand you completely where it's like there were people who were not doing that and they were living lives true to themselves even if society cast them out,
yeah,
and they were happy, at least they tried to make themselves happy. But yeah,
yeah,
I would also say that the limitations probably definitely is like, let's
exactly. And
not, we
having
can't
yeah,
glorify this, like we can't make this
yeah,
lifestyle a good thing, I can see that
yeah.
as well. So
Yeah, and it is, it is valued in it being the first,
yeah,
but I guess me that I consume game media like no tomorrow, like
yeah, yeah,
every month is Pride Month for me. So
yeah,
I like devour it. And I could see the skeletons and the webs of the story in all the other, and they follow the same structure of like the other girl, the wife, or the wife
yeah,
to
yeah,
be, the secret, the sad ending. A lot of them have the jail, or one of them goes to jail, or commits suicide. Was in a bunch of them. They just can't do it. So it's like, but so I could separate it in my mind. This being the first one,
yeah,
but once again, when all these stories have the same skeleton
yeah.
of queer sadness, it like, I
Oh,
moved
for
on
sure,
from that.
yeah.
I moved on from that era.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
important to, for kids to know the subject matter. Like read one or two books in that queer sad era. Read one or two books in the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah,
Those are important.
yeah.
It's not saying like, oh, don't read those. We should only be happy. No, it's like with recommendations, it just depends. And then even with the webs of each one, this one is still, I'm like, wow, this one does things differently. Like the Hella is sympathetic, while in others, like the wife is like the villain, or they kind of draw her as the villain, even though I never see the other woman as the villain, because it's like, bro, you've been lied to for years. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you're gonna
exactly.
react a certain way. That's
Exactly,
normal.
for sure.
Yeah, so it's like, it's still important to go back to James Baldwin's work because his is not the stereotypical. So I could recommend it. It's just, it depends on your mindset and, what, content warning. You're
I
going to
mean,
be sad
I would
after.
say that maybe not even just a queer classic, but just a classic in general. It definitely should be
Yeah,
read by multiple backgrounds of people. Everybody, it's like I said, all the other classics like Frankenstein, Dracula, those classics, this should be a part of that overarching everybody should read it kind of thing. I
Yeah.
think that that is definitely like, but yeah, obviously, if you're looking for a happy ending, don't
Yeah,
pick it
but
up. But if
that
you
was a
want to like broaden your horizons, read a great expanse amount of books. This is one to
books,
add
yeah.
on to that for sure.
So yeah, that was one of the critiques of James Baldwin, like from his huge critics, is that he was um too sad and angry in his books. And I could see that with the recommendation of not reading all his books at once, because they're like very human condition and very, centered in those, but they're beautiful books and they do deserve, and I do recommend you read some of his books eventually. Just space them out. That's my recommendation.
I mean, and as a gay black man, I would imagine he is very bitter. Who wouldn't be
Exactly.
right at the time? Like, of course, he's gonna be
Yeah.
upset about certain things, and you know,
Yeah.
I think critics who were saying stuff like that, it's just like, what would you expect if you were downtrodden in every kind of aspect, right? You're talking about a gay black man. That's like that's a lot for someone to go through, right? Like they're going through everything under the book essentially, and it's like, yeah, of course you're going to be better. You're when you know your history and when you realize what was happening at the time, when you can't even be true to yourself, when you have family members you love being hurt because of situations, of course you're going to be
Yeah.
better. Like what else could you expect? But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely his
Which
focus
the
on just
movie,
yeah.
yeah, because I also saw the movie adaptations, and then the movie adaptations are like 98% loyal. They just changed the sadness ratio and they changed the endings, which I find so funny, especially with if Beale Street could talk, you know, it's funny because I'm like, ooh, I loved the book, I loved it, but like the movie felt better,
Mm,
but only because of the different ending. Because the ending in the book is devastatingly harsh, and then the movie elevates it differently into like, but they both have the sadness and the realness of the time. But it's just so funny because it's like, how one black creator like does a happier ending while the other one, but they're separated by different times.
right.
So it's like maybe it's because, like the critique like of, maybe too much sadness, but that's the recommendation I could give,
I
you
think
know.
it's blasphemy to say that the movie's better than the book, by the way.
I know. Sometimes no, I know, but it's because I'm like, oh, they gave a softer, happier ending, and I was like, oh, I was looking for that because the
How
ending.
dare you?
I know. Forgive me, book lords. But
But yeah,
yeah,
I
but
think I would recommend it as a general classic for sure.
yeah. So talking about classics, we're not going to leave our summer of classics. Our next book is from E.M. Foster. It is Maurice. This one, I don't know that much about it. I just know it's queer joy, and the couple it's based on is like a couple that withstood. So, like, it's gonna be queer joy. So let's see that classic in another direction.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be nice to see the difference here and like the sad and then the happy of
Yeah,
classics in
yeah,
that time frame and in that mindset. That'll be interesting.
yeah. Because I think they're only a decade apart, or not even. I think they're only a few years apart, written wise. But yeah, so that's this episode 15 of Craft Blends, another one in the books. And I want to thank Heather for being an awesome, awesome bestie. And till next time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.